Hello. Welcome along to episode 225 of Adventures in Pop. My name is Simon Jacobs, and in this episode, I would like to talk about the film that has been resurrected after exactly 50 years, Slade in Flame. Now, a little bit of context first of all. Obviously, this came out mid-70s, 50 years, and I guess the context that you might need to know, and for those of you who are not that familiar with Slade and the whole kind of 70s glam rock thing, which I don't think I've talked about before, is that in the 70s, basically, some of the biggest selling artists, and actually this goes back to the 60s and even the late 50s, found it necessary to make a film. And so this was not new, and not revolutionary. You think about the fact Elvis was making tons of films back in the early 60s. We had, the Beatles making films, the Monkees, and even into the 70s, artists like David Essex I think he just made two films, That'll Be the Day and Stardust. And then Slade's manager, I think, suggested to them, apparently, that, they should also make a film. And they decided to make a film that would be Slade in Flame, where they basically invented this rock group, Flame. Each of the members of Slade were the members of Flame. And this film kind of charts the rise and fall of Flame. And I guess what makes this stand out and why people were initially bewildered, but then I think, critical acclaim sort of shifted on this and people came to love it and to realize that this was far from being, the low point of Slade's career at that moment, at that time. It was seen, I think, as a bit of a misstep. I think people now see it as absolutely central to the kind of Slade story, the Slade canon. And the reason that people were so bewildered is it is quite gritty. It is bleak, gritty, and very 70s. And it shows the 70s in all its really quite grim glory. So I went along to see it this week. I'd never seen it before, I should say. I did know about this film, but I think when it first came out, I must have been 12, something like that. And I think this film was a AA or even an X film. I'm not quite sure what its certificate was. But anyway, I didn't go and see it. And I think I wanted to, but I didn't get around to it for some reason. And then it disappeared. And film critic Mark Kermode, who you might have heard of in this country, in the UK, has been a champion for this film for years and years and years. And I think has been partially responsible for getting it back out into some limited cinemas over this week and at the Film Institute on South Bank. So what did I make of Slade in Flame? First of all, should we just talk about Slade for a minute, just for a second? Let's just recap a bit about Slade, because they were really interesting. Slade, according to, I think, the people who count up the sales of records, Slade sold more singles in the 1970s than any other British act. They had something like 6 number ones. They even had 3 number one hits that went straight in at number one, and that was unheard of. It was the first time it had happened. I think it was the first time it had ever happened, and it happened 3 times in a row for Slade, that they had a new single come out and it was straight to number one in its first week of release. And that was really quite a dramatic feat at the time, and certainly was a sign of just how big and how popular Slade were. They were from the Black Country. They were from, Birmingham, Wolverhampton area. And I think to this day, have maintained their really lovely Brum accents, which obviously are all over this film. Very much champions of kind of working class, boys made good. And that also is reflected in the film because, Flame are, as you would possibly guess, working class boys, probably from Birmingham, who made good. So lots of similarities, and they're telling a familiar tale. So Slade were really huge, and from certainly between about 73 and 75, really they could do no wrong. And in 73, they had their biggest hits. I think that was Come On, Feel the Noise, Squeeze Me, Please Me, and Merry Christmas, Everybody, which still comes around literally every Christmas and pays the band's bills. So even to this day, Slade have a bit of a profile because of their Christmas hit, and because they were just huge. They had #1 albums. They never quite cracked America. They tried and tried and tried and tried, and probably spent too long in America trying. But they were huge in Britain and big across Europe. And they were a sensation, and they were definitely part of the kind of glam rock explosion of that period, which to me kind of started with Mark Bolan and T-Rex and included Slade, Sweet, Gary Glitter, the Glitter Band, and many, many others. I shouldn't forget Mud and Suzi Quatro, should I? So, a really major kind of wave of musical style in the early to mid 70s that faded away just in time for punk rock to rear its, loud and mischievous ugly head in 1976-77, which kind of laid to waste pretty much everything that had gone before. So, that's a bit of the background. They were a really significant player of the 1970s, to put it mildly. And some of the outfits they wore, are very much redolent of those times. So the film itself, well, I should say the film had a few other famous people in it, most notably Tom Conti, a young Tom Conti playing a music agent. The story is really simple, and I don't think, if you haven't seen the film, I'm really not giving anything away if I tell you this. No, there's no plot spoiler in this, but basically this band Flame is formed out of two bands that are kind of unsuccessfully on the circuit at the time. They decide to come together and form this band Flame, and it's the story really of getting caught between two different agents. They've obviously signed some terrible contract with the first agent. They get picked up by a second agent who then makes them successful, but the first agent still wants to kind of claim their part of the action, particularly when this fictional band Flame becomes successful. And by the time they've kind of had a big fight, and the original agent is kind of back on the scene to claim them, it is too late, because by then they are burned out and ready to quit. So I would say this is a tale that demonstrates a couple of things. One is it's very good at showing you just how grim the 1970s kind of looked. When you looked at kind of the really working class areas of this city that never really gets named, but probably is Birmingham, and all the back-to-back houses and the smoke, etc. You kind of look at it and think, oh my God, but it was really like that. And the other thing is, it gives you a pretty clear picture of just how nasty the music business was, and how completely naive bands were at that time, probably still are today to some extent, but definitely at that time, where they would sign something. They would probably be drunk and they'd sign some contract or another, not realizing that this was going to, be like a noose around their necks for the whole of their career, and could just be a nightmare for them to be working away, making other people rich, while not really seeing much payback for their efforts and their creativity. So that all comes across really well. I would also say, on the negatives, I would say the whole film's a bit of a mess. Sometimes it has the flavour almost of a carry-on film. There's a little bit of that kind of all misses, or Mrs. Don't Get Me Started, that kind of campery of the 1970s, and some of it is very bleak indeed. So it sort of veers between a kind of a downbeat humour and no humour at all, and a little spot of Clockwork Orange type violence. But it is an intriguing film. The bands themselves, what would I say about? Well, Noddy Holder, the lead singer, seems to be completely at home in this environment, and it seems relaxed and carefree about the whole thing. Jim Lee, who was the other main co-writer of the music with Noddy Holder, seems somewhat uncomfortable, I think, throughout most of the film. Seems to be quite sort of withdrawn, but that may be that he's acting brilliantly and the character he's playing is meant to be withdrawn, but he does look like he's thinking, what the hell am I doing? Don Powell, the drummer, had just had a really serious car accident and had lost his memory to some quite great extent, because apparently he had to be told each day what they were doing, where they were up to, what his lines might be, and even to some extent what his name was. So he was not in a good state, and yet his performance in that respect is quite heroic, because you would never know that he was kind of wrestling with all of this stuff going on in the background. He seems kind of fine, really. And that leaves me with Dave Hill. Dave Hill basically laughs or giggles all the way through the film, and has the most, what can I say, dramatic pudding bowl haircut that you've probably ever seen on anybody outside the 1960s. And I wonder whether maybe whoever cut his hair should face, well, at least a trial, maybe prison. So they come across, in a way, they come across quite charming and sort of themselves in an odd, awkward sort of way. And I would say, look, it's worth seeing. It's 90 minutes long. It's not going to kill you. It's not to me a great classic, but it does contain probably the best record, the best song that they ever recorded, which is How Does It Feel, which gets played right at the very beginning. And I kind of wanted that song to come around again a few more times. In some films, how that does, the theme song of the film reappears. That wasn't the case here. It gets played once at the beginning, and then that's it. It is a truly fantastic song. At the time, when it came out, I think it only got to number 15 and was regarded basically as a sign that their flame was waning. So it's interesting how we can reassess this in retrospect. And I think I'm not alone in lauding How Does It Feel as being really a very great song indeed. I've actually done a cover version of it. I think I might have played a little bit of it once to you, but one day I might release my cover versions album, and How Does It Feel is bound to be on there. Not an easy song to cover, I would say, but let's not get sidetracked into that. So that's it. I just wanted to tell you just how interesting this film is. Its depiction of the 70s, its depiction of the music industry, even though it's a strange film, and occasionally you get the feeling that the microphone that's supposed to be picking up the dialogue is in the wrong place, and you end up with the sound of a door slamming or the background audience rather than the actual dialogue itself in the foreground. So sometimes there seems to be a bit of trouble with the kind of sound balance, but that's a detail. Go and see it. Don't have any expectations. Do expect something bleak and 70s, and it's in colour, but when I got home, my vision of it was almost black and white. It was that kind of 70s-ish, dark and brown, So there we go. Just before I go, I would like to say, well, first of all, if you would like to subscribe, then please do. Lots of people have done, and their lives have been, I think, well, just made just that tiny bit better. And anyway, I really appreciate it. So thank you. And the other thing, just to say, last week, my latest single, Ibiza Sunset, came out. If you haven't heard that, I think you probably should. It's on YouTube, it's on all your streaming platforms. And just out is the new Goldhawk Foxes single, Ready and Willing, which is also ever so good. So do go and check that out too. I'll be back very soon. Take care. Bye-bye.